Madeleine McCann disappeared without a trace. For years, investigations dragged on, suspects were interrogated, and theories emerged. But some overlooked clues may hide the answer the world has been seeking for so long. Imagine a British couple enjoying a vacation at a luxurious resort in Portugal. The night is calm, the weather perfect. They go out for dinner with friends, leaving their children asleep in their room. A few hours later, when the mother returns to check on the children, what she finds changes everything. The bed is empty. Her daughter has vanished without a trace. This is the scene that sparked one of the most intriguing and debated cases in modern history. Madeleine McCann, 3 years old, disappeared without any clear explanation. There were no signs of forced entry, no direct witnesses, no ransom demands, just an empty room and a desperate search for answers. In the following days, the girl's disappearance became a global phenomenon. Headlines around the world, search teams combing every corner of the area, and investigations that dragged on for years. Yet despite all this effort, no definitive answer was found. Every year, new clues emerge. Some seem promising, others only add more confusion. But there is one disturbing detail in this case. Could it be that the truth was in front of our eyes all along, but was ignored? Many pieces of evidence were dismissed without explanation. Some witnesses changed their statements. And at the center of it all, one question remains unanswered. What really happened to Madeleine McCann that night? If we thought we had already heard everything about this case, maybe it's time to look at it with fresh eyes. In crimes like this, there is an expected pattern. If a child goes missing, there is usually a ransom demand, signs of a break-in, or an obvious suspect. But none of that happened in Madeleine's case. What makes this mystery even stranger is that, at the beginning, the Portuguese police followed a completely different path from what many imagined. Instead of focusing solely on a possible unknown kidnapper, investigators began questioning what was happening within the family itself. And that's when everything changed. Tracking dogs indicated the smell of blood and the odor of a corpse in the apartment where Madeleine disappeared and in the car rented by the McCanns weeks later. But when DNA tests were conducted, the results were inconclusive. Moreover, the girl's own parents exhibited unusual behavior for victims of a kidnapping. At several moments, their statements were contradictory. Why did they refuse to answer some of the police's questions? Then comes an even more disconcerting fact. Some of the strangest clues in the case were simply ignored or dismissed. Why? A failure in the investigation? Media influence? Or is there something they never wanted us to know? Madeleine McCann's disappearance is not just a police case. It has become an unprecedented media phenomenon. From day one, the world press covered every detail of this story. Photos of Madeleine were everywhere. The British government became directly involved in the investigation, something unusual for a case like this. Millions of dollars were invested, generating a mobilization never before seen for a missing child. But this exposure also had a side effect. The more attention a case receives, the harder it is to separate fact from assumption. The pressure to find answers quickly can hinder investigations. Theories arise, suspects are pointed out, and amidst all of this, the truth may be lost. Criminologist David Cantor asserts that in highly publicized crimes, there is often a tendency to protect certain individuals, intentionally or not. The McCann case was one of the most covered by the media in history. Did that help or hinder the search for answers? There is another crucial point. With so many twists and turns, some clues simply disappeared from the radar. After all, why did the information about the mysterious man seen near the apartment never lead to a concrete suspect? Why was the open window treated as the main clue, even when experts said it was unlikely that a kidnapper would have used that route? Every piece of this puzzle seems not to fit completely, but could it be that we already have the answer and simply haven't noticed? In 2013, a man named Martin Smith reported something that had been bothering him since the night Madeleine disappeared. He and his family were returning from dinner when they saw a man carrying a child in his arms near the McCann's apartment. The girl was wearing light-colored pajamas, similar to what Madeleine wore that night. The British police only took this report seriously years later. But the strangest part came afterward. Martin believed that this man resembled Jerry McCann, Madeleine's father. What does this sighting really mean? And why did it take so long? The question remains the same. What really happened to Madeleine McCann? Could it be that some evidence has already revealed the truth, but we simply didn't pay attention? Now let's analyze the strongest clues in the case, those that might contain the key to finally solving this mystery. When a child goes missing, especially in kidnapping cases, the logic is simple. Kidnappers make contact quickly. On average, criminals intending extortion get in touch within the first 24 to 48 hours. But in Madeleine's case, that never happened. This absence of communication created a deadlock in the early days of the investigation. If Madeleine had been taken by an ordinary kidnapper, why did no one ask for money? Criminologist Mark Williams Thomas stated that this situation was atypical and raised the possibility of a crime with completely different motivations. But then another strange detail emerged: the open window. The Portuguese police initially believed that Madeleine was taken from the apartment through that window. However, when forensic experts analyzed the area, they noticed something bizarre. The window opening was too small for someone to carry a 3-year-old child without leaving marks or signs of a struggle. Colin Sutton, an investigator from Scotland Yard, was one of the first to challenge that a kidnapper climbed through the window, grabbed Madeleine, and left unseen was not only unlikely, it was virtually impossible. So the question remains, if this window wasn't used to take Madeleine, why was it left open? Could it have been a distraction to divert attention from the true crime scene? Among the witnesses interviewed during the investigation, there was something that could not be ignored. Some people reported seeing a man carrying a child on the night of the disappearance. In 2013, Scotland Yard released a composite sketch of this suspect. Yet to this day, his identity has never been confirmed. Was he the kidnapper? Or someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? Meanwhile, another potentially crucial piece of evidence was discovered, but was handled with extreme controversy: the smell of blood and a cadaver-like odor detected by the tracking dogs. The dogs, highly trained to identify specific scents, found traces inside the apartment and, even stranger, in the car rented by the McCanns weeks after the disappearance. But when DNA tests were conducted, the results were inconclusive. This raised questions. Were the samples contaminated? Or did the tests fail to detect something that was actually there? And then we come to the most unsettling point of this case: Madeleine's own parents. During the investigation, Jerry and Kate McCann exhibited behaviors that intrigued the investigators. At a critical moment, they refused to answer a series of police questions. Why wouldn't they cooperate if they were simply trying to find their daughter? These contradictions open up a new discussion. Could it be that experts already have the answer, but it was ignored? The Madeleine McCann case began as a missing child incident and quickly turned into one of the most debated criminal mysteries in modern history. Initially, the kidnapping theory was the main line of investigation, but not all investigators agreed with this version. Gonçalo Amaral, a former investigator with the Portuguese police, was one of the first to question this narrative. He believed that Madeleine had not been kidnapped, but was instead the victim of an accident within the apartment. According to him, the parents might have covered up the truth to avoid legal repercussions. In his book, The Truth of the Lie, Amaral presented his suspicions, but his role in the case did not last long. Shortly afterward, he was removed from the investigation. This raises an important question. Did the investigation take the wrong path from the very beginning? If so, was it due to police error, or was something else influencing the direction of the case? While Amaral was being sidelined, the British media mobilized in favor of the McCanns. The family began to be treated not only as victims, but almost as celebrities, receiving support from influential figures and even from the British government. Did this shift the focus of the investigation? Mark Williams Thomas, a British criminal investigator, offered a different perspective. He did not believe in the domestic accident theory and suggested that Madeleine might have been kidnapped by a predator who already knew the family. This would mean that the crime was premeditated, not a random opportunity. But then, why did no concrete clue lead to the case's resolution? Part 2. The parents' strange behavior and the influence of the media. Another expert who analyzed the case was Jim Clemente, a former FBI agent and criminal profiler. For him, one crucial detail stood out from the beginning: the behavior of the parents. Jerry and Kate McCann consistently supported the kidnapping theory, but avoided answering certain critical police questions. In any disappearance case, investigators typically observe the reactions of the closest family members to detect signs of deceit or information concealment. Clemente noted that their behavior was unusual for parents who truly believed their daughter had been kidnapped. Was there something to hide? Meanwhile, the media played a controversial role in the case. Criminologist David Cantor believes that media pressure may have distorted the investigation. The focus was not only on finding Madeleine, but on building a narrative that made sense to the public. Could this excessive exposure have pushed the truth away? And what if, amidst so much speculation, the answer had already been given, but it was ignored? Now let's analyze the main theories that attempt to explain what really happened that night. From the outset, several theories emerged trying to explain what happened to Madeleine McCann. Some were dismissed, while others gained strength over time. But three of them remain the most discussed to this day. The first is the possibility that Madeleine was a victim of a child for this type of crime in Europe. And this raised suspicions from the start of the investigation. Kidnappers involved in such crimes usually remove their victims from the area within hours, before any search can be effective. This detail could explain why, despite so many international efforts, Madeleine was never found. One of the facts reinforcing this theory is the report from witnesses who saw a man carrying a child on the night of the disappearance. Years later, Scotland Yard released a composite sketch of the suspect, yet his identity was never confirmed. If Madeleine was indeed taken by a criminal organization, it is possible that she was inserted into an illegal adoption scheme, or even something far worse. But if that's true, why has no concrete lead emerged in more than a decade? Another possibility raised, and one that generated enormous controversy, is the hypothesis of an accident within the apartment. Some believe that Madeleine may have suffered a fatal fall, and that, in a moment of desperation, her own parents covered up the incident. This theory gained traction mainly after the work of the tracking dogs used in the investigation. They identified the smell of blood and the odor of a corpse both in the apartment and in the car rented by the McCanns weeks later. This detail raises an uncomfortable question. If Madeleine was kidnapped by a stranger, how can these pieces of evidence be explained? Moreover, the parents' behavior also raised suspicions. Kate and Jerry refused to answer some questions from the Portuguese police and quickly hired lawyers. For some, this could be seen as a natural move by desperate parents who were being unjustly accused. For others, it was a clear sign that they were hiding something. The Portuguese investigator Gonçalo Amaral, who led the case initially, believed in this possibility and even wrote a book titled The Truth of the Lie, in which he detailed this hypothesis. But his insistence on pointing the finger at the McCanns resulted in his removal from the case, which only deepened the doubts. Was he wrong, or was he too close to the truth? There is also the hypothesis that Madeleine was kidnapped by a local predator. This theory suggests that a criminal may have observed the family's routine for days before acting. What stands out in this case is that other apartments near the resort where the McCanns were staying were also targeted by break-in attempts. If a kidnapping did indeed occur, it is possible that the criminal was studying the best opportunity to act without being caught. An important detail in this theory is the fact that Madeleine's parents and their friends followed a pattern. Every night, they left the children asleep in their room while dining at a nearby restaurant and made rounds every 30 minutes to check if they were safe. For someone keeping an eye on the activity, that time interval might have been enough to enter the apartment and leave with the child unnoticed. The problem is that even with so many reports of suspicious movements in the area that night, no concrete evidence has emerged to confirm this hypothesis. Looking at these possibilities, the inevitable question is, if any of them are true, why have we never had a definitive answer? Could it be that the investigations failed irreparably, or was the truth deliberately suppressed? Now, more than a decade later, new technologies may bring answers. Advances in DNA testing, for example, allow for reanalysis of samples that were previously deemed inconclusive. In other criminal cases, evidence analyzed with modern methods has led to the identification of suspects decades later. Could this also happen in Madeleine's case? Another interesting possibility is the use of artificial intelligence and facial recognition to try to identify possible sightings of the girl over the years. Kidnappers can change a child's identity, but certain physical traits remain. With the tools available today, could a lost clue finally lead to the truth? Madeleine McCann's disappearance remains one of the world's greatest criminal mysteries. Failures in the investigation, conflicting evidence, and contradictory theories have made this case seem unsolvable. But are we closer to the truth than we think? Considering everything that has been investigated, it is clear that something is wrong in this story. Whether due to incompetence, cover-up, or simply bad luck, a crucial detail was lost along the way. Whether the truth can still be uncovered or will remain buried forever, only time will tell. The Madeleine McCann case remains one of the greatest criminal mysteries in the world, but perhaps we are closer to the truth than ever before. With advances in technology, new possibilities arise, and what once seemed impossible to solve may finally have an ending. Forensic science has evolved greatly since inconclusive can now be redone with greater accuracy. In many archived cases, old samples have been re-examined and have led to the identification of suspects years later. If there is any genetic trace that went unnoticed, it could be the key piece to finally understanding what happened that night. Another tool that could change everything is facial recognition. Madeleine disappeared as a child, but with today's artificial intelligence, it is possible to predict what she might look like now. This has already helped solve other missing persons cases, where victims were identified even decades later. If Madeleine is alive somewhere, there is a real chance that this technology could find her, and we cannot ignore the power of the internet. Today, collaborative investigations have already solved cases that the police could not crack. Online communities analyze images, cross-reference information, and reconstruct the steps of victims in old crimes. Could the answer emerge from an amateur detective who noticed something that no one else did? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: this case is not over yet. The questions remain unanswered, and as long as that continues, Madeleine McCann will not be forgotten. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think technology can finally reveal what happened, or will this mystery be buried forever? Comment below. And if you like cases like this, there's a video appearing on your screen right now that might interest you. See you there.